Hello, my name is Rich Howard, owner of Architectural Builder Supply. This video is to bring you a closer look at the IVES. This is their part number 7212V set. This happens to be a offset mounted pivot set. The 7212, it is the top and bottom set, and let's take a look at it right now. So what we have here is the bottom portion in two components, obviously. The jamb component, and this piece here is absolutely what makes it handed. Well, so does this part, but the entire bottom portion makes it a handed unit. And I mention that because IVES does a really good job at making everything they can reversible, and that's nice in pivots. Just this can't be made reversible. Not any way I can think of. So this is what a bottom pivot looks like. This is a left-hand unit. This video is going to demonstrate a left hand. And I'll tell you, not only is IVES a name that's very familiar to me when it comes to hardware in general, as they've been in business since the late 19th century, but very common to see in architectural storefronts. Aluminum storefronts is what I mean to say. Aluminum doors and frames, you'll often see IVES pivots. And in fact, this client in particular is actually looking for pivots for a Conair Entara, E-N-T-A-R-A, and I was able to reverse, engineer, so to speak, what the client actually had in the site. I need this Conair pivot. I've got Entara doors, which I'm not familiar with an Entara door model or series at all, but knowing that Conair doesn't manufacture hardware, any of it, in fact, even exit devices that will be on a door that says Conair, their concealed vertical rod, their rim, and then their panel line. They don't make those. There's a company or companies that makes those for them. Same with pivots. And I think for Conair, hardware is a means to an end for them. They make aluminum storefront and curtain wall and many other items that you'll find on their website. So I knew that it wasn't some impossible item that we were looking for. It was going to be a pivot from a major manufacturer. When I saw the items, got the dimensions of the screw hole locations, I knew that this was, plus I can kind of tell by looking at it, yeah, that looks like an IVES pivot. I can't describe what makes me feel comfortable that it's an IVES pivot, but the general construction is unique to IVES. No other manufacturer really looks just like this. So I knew it was IVES, and sure enough. So we've got a 3/4 inch offset pivot here, and I'll talk to you about what 3/4 inch offset means. This could certainly be used in, obviously, aluminum, wood doors, hollow metal. This could all be made to work. Wood doors and aluminum storefront would be very typical. Here is our top pivot, and facing it the same way as we were before. Okay, we've got a couple of halves that are here that easily come apart. Okay, got that bearing that's in there. The underside of the header and the rabbet area and the top of the door will both be prepped for this top pivot. Easy, simple, and straightforward. I'll just put a tape measure on these items quickly, give you an idea of scale. Overall width of the pivot looks like it's about 4.5. Overall depth about 2.5. The floor portion about 3 3/8. Overall height, overall width about 2 7/8. And then that door portion overall looks like it's about 3.5, and then about 2 3/4. It's going to include screw packages and a complementary finish. By the way, this is the SP313. That means sprayed dark bronze is what this is. This will also include its installation instructions, which will double as the template. And you may be, yeah, there's more here than is needed. You might be initially a bit, one thing that I like about IVES pivots is that the paperwork is possibly less confusing. It is more approachable. You will see other manufacturers, the bigger names in pivots as far as I'm concerned, the bigger name, and you get every dimension possible. It's as if you're looking at the wiring schematic of a space shuttle. And that's not necessarily the way that I feel, but I know the first time I looked at a drawing far more detailed than this, I thought, gosh, is everything on here necessary? Turns out it all is necessary to know. But in instances where you're installing the material, you can certainly get by with a lot less data, is the bottom line. So if you're new to pivots, you might want to look at IVES first because, like I said, their paperwork is just perhaps less confusing, less intimidating, and certainly is indeed more approachable. The installation instructions they've included are for there's 2 pages, the bottom component and the top component, okay, or what's in the packaging. We are going to switch to the screen view in a moment, and we're going to look at all the supporting documentation. But first, let's talk about what is an offset pivot. If you are enjoying this video, please click thumbs up or like, and also please consider subscribing to our channel. Let's move on to the rest of the video. Now, an offset pivot is distinguished as such because it's different than a center-hung pivot. Both center-hung pivots and offset pivots have a vertical axis of pivoting, and the difference between the two is where, in relationship to that door, is that vertical axis of pivoting placed. Now, you can take one type of pivot and do unusual things with it, in terms of it not being defined as you would see it in a catalog for a center-hung or an offset pivot. And these 2 different pivot types are used for 2 very different types of applications. Just to not get too far into center-hung pivots are usually used when you are looking to conceal the hardware, is the bottom line. An offset pivot, you're not going to conceal this hardware because when the door is closed, you're going to see all of that. There's no way to disguise that. Well, I've done projects where most of that is disguised. I did a project where it was an extremely unusual door thickness. The client only needed to go to 90 degree and had all kinds of trim applied to the bottom of the door. And this was a wardrobe closet, and that door literally bled into the wall construction. And what allowed most of this to get concealed is the fact that it did need to only go to 90 degrees, so we weren't going to get in trouble with any conflict with our wall condition. But it was an unusual door thickness, maybe a standard door thickness, with a couple of inches of applied molding to the face of the unit. So the client actually was able to, we went with an 1.5 inch offset pivot so that we could get the door portion where the fasteners would attach to the bottom of the door into the bottom rail far enough back, but then mortise out the bottom of the trim to basically conceal all of this. Now, why didn't we use a center hung pivot? Because it would have changed the requirements of the outside corner of the door and where it would pivot. If we had a center hung pivot, well, that pivot point would force that outside corner to hit the jamb, and unless you're going to get into some extreme routing like creating a concave preparation in your rabbet of your frame, which is not unheard of or impossible. If you look at woodworking books from the turn of the 20th century, forgive me, 1900, you are definitely going to see, if you looked up Harmon hinges, you will see concave radius jambs. So when that center hung pivot, vertical axis of pivoting is here, you're going to cause a problem here that you would otherwise, you're not going to concave ball groove your jamb, although it's done. You'd probably radius or bullnose the edge of the door to account for that. Well, that's not going to work because that door needs to blend into the wall with the chair rail and everything else that's applied, the base, the crown, everything's stuck to this door. And when you have an offset pivot, sorry, I had a speed bump. That vertical axis of pivoting is out here, so it's rotating around that point. So you don't get in trouble with, when you're only going to 90 degrees with all of this material that's been applied, because you don't get into a point of making contact. Now, one thing that's extremely helpful, and I've done it in the past for my own edification or knowledge and for clients is you toss all this into AutoCAD or have someone do that for you. It's a service that we can provide in order to tell you exactly where that vertical axis of pivoting needs to be. I've had a client one time want to take a door, pair of doors in a closet. This is going to go to 90 degrees. This one needed to go to 90, 180, and 270. And the question was, what's that pivot point in order to get that door around the stub wall 270 degrees? AutoCAD's great for that kind of stuff. So the definition of a offset pivot is referenced from the face of the door to the vertical axis of pivoting. And there are two. Well, I suppose there could be more than two if you get into custom pivots, but there are two. It's 3/4 inch and it's 1.5 inches. This is definitely a 3/4 inch offset pivot. And that means when this is installed per the template, the face of the door to the vertical axis of pivoting is 3/4 inch. It's going to be really similar to what a butt hinge is. Okay. In typical instances, this is going to work. However, and by the way, 3/4 inch also comes up in at least one other part of the templating of this pivot. The edge of the door to the vertical axis of pivoting is also about 3/4 inch, but that's not what we're defining. When you are looking at the door in elevation, from the face of the door as it swings towards you to the vertical axis of pivoting, down through the top pivot, all like a plumb bob, all the way down here, that's 3/4 inch. You absolutely have to calculate, will that work? Because it may not. You might need what in effect becomes a wide throw type of pivot, meaning 1.5 inches. You might have a deep inset, you might have unusually thick casing, you might have some trim detail that you want to move that vertical axis of pivoting point out further because that's what you're rotating around. Not that tighter pivot point 3/4 inch, but when you move it out 1.5 inches, you're rotating around that. And when you use that rotate function in AutoCAD, it really starts to become really clear the effect of where you place the vertical axis of pivoting has on how the door, or in many cases, a bookcase. People will order from us center hung pivots, about a 400 or 500 pound capacity for bookcase applications. Well, that's really handy to toss that into AutoCAD so that you can see exactly how this 8-inch deep, 40-inch wide bookcase is going to need to move around that. And there is an excellent online article. The gentleman's last name is Katz, K-A-T-Z. His first name is Gary. I think I'm checking this as I'm telling you. Yeah, if you look up Gary Katz, hidden door bookcase, this gentleman it's at least 10 years old at this point. This gentleman took some time to basically say, you want to do a bookcase with a center hung pivot? This is how I did it, and really, really interesting. But it all goes to prove the point that some short amount of work in AutoCAD would just quickly show you what all of that needs to be, and extremely enlightening. So this project is 3/4 inch offset pivots, aluminum storefront. Yeah, that's going to work. Aluminum storefront is just simply the bottom line. Nothing unusual. The doors are going to 90 degrees. They might go further. No one's thinking about it. You've got a masonry wall that could be 8-inch deep. You've got 4 9/16 aluminum storefront. It's inside 1.5 inches or 2 inches. If you were to hyperextend that, even though you've got a door closer, if the wind were to grab that and rip the arm out, it's going to hit the outside corner of the masonry. You know what? No one's thinking about it. 1.5 inch offset could possibly permit that door to safely go past that 110 degree or so dimension without hitting the outside corner of the wall. But again, no one's thinking about it. So let's switch to the screen view and let's look at the supporting documentation. Mortising for this is something that is actually not difficult at all. You are going to need some way of, if it's a wood door, some way of prepping everything. If it was me, I'd be using only a router for such a job. People will say, well, I don't have a router, but I've got a hammer and chisel. Great. Excellent. I would probably make a mess of that because I'm not going to get a really nice flat bottom, but I sure can with my router. And you're going to want some template or jig that you're going to clamp on or attach to the door so that you can run your router in there really nice. That makes easy work. If it's aluminum storefront, they're going to be prepping everything, giving you reinforcements in the top of the door and the bottom of the door and the header for you to quite frankly attach this templated hardware to. There'll be, you know, 3/16 steel with drilled and tapped holes for probably what's 1/4-20. All right, let's switch to the screen view and let's look at our supporting information. If you've not hit subscribe yet, we would very much appreciate if you did, and hopefully you're enjoying this video. Now, let's get back to it. And before we hop into our supporting documentation and additional review, here's that Gary Katz hidden bookcase installation. Actually, that's... Well, this is not the original site. Yeah, Gary M. Katz articles, I'd imagine. Okay, so this is carpentry is where that's found, apparently. Yeah, so this is carpentry.com, and these are definitely snippets out of the work that he did that really is showing you that pivot point for what would be obviously a center hung pivot. You wouldn't want to use offset. You'd have nowhere to stick the knuckle of the unit to. And you can see that as a result of that, you need to put a radius on there. Now you could, again, concave this piece out there. I don't see why it would matter at all because of this designed overlapping, you know, trim. You know, if the entire wall looked like this, you'd never know there was a bookcase there. A real big bevel on this over here to make sure that that all clears. And you get the concept. He does a phenomenal job laying all of this out. And this is obviously where that bookcase, you know, is going to be open. It's a right-hand reverse is what it is. This shows it at 90 degrees. So you can tell that 1 3/4 pivot point is crucial to obtain that 1/4 inch margin that's there based on where they've drawn this piece of trim. So you can see when you play with this dimension, you're going to change the behavior of everything. Yeah, this is different than how I recall it. This might include a bunch of information on actually making the bookcase as well. But nonetheless, I think, yeah, that's probably a Rixson 3, yeah it is, it's a Rixson 370 that's there. Common center hung pivot. A lot of people make these, most absolutely IVES. So look for your IVES center hung pivot and that 500-pound capacity. I personally would consider a heavier pivot only in the sense that when you go, you know, will this bookcase weigh 500 pounds? I suppose it could, but I doubt it will. But when you go with larger pivots, you get larger arms that will give you more real estate to which to secure it to, but in terms of a weight capacity. And here's obviously his homemade template. He's got a jig that he's clamped onto there, just like I had said earlier. This is how you're going to want to do this. You'll take the time to make the template because you want the end result to be exactly correct. This is just 1x poplar, very typical. I have made countless one-off templates, and then they get hung on the wall. And should I ever need them again, I can pull it right off the wall. Yeah, good stuff. He's obviously got reinforcing down at the bottom to get all that attached to. Right on. I'll leave that to you to investigate. Very interesting material there. Now, our item itself, this is indeed showing a left hand, but it is indeed showing the wrong item. Yeah, that's better. Now we've got the right item there. That does indeed show a left hand. The V is what I had different. So, shows you what it looks like when it'd be put together. 3/4 inch offset top and bottom set. One thing that IVES does is they use the word set in their part number. A lot of people will say, yeah, I need the 7212, but what's the part number for the top pivot? No, you're going to get the top pivot. Oh, I don't have to. No, it's included. Left-handed, dark bronze painted, top and bottom. 1 3/4 minimum door thickness with 1/8 inch bevel in 2. You don't have to bevel your doors. You don't have to do anything to them, but when you are installing the material according to the templating, they're going to be basing this on your doors having a bevel on it. If you're going to leave the guidance of the template, you'll be needing to account for how you'll end up changing, the dimensions that you'll build everything to. Maximum door weight, 200 pounds. That's a very common question as well. What's it rated for? Specify left or right, absolutely. Vertical adjustment range is 3/16 with positive locking. So this spindle stud down here can be manipulated. Can give you some vertical height that is not common of most manufacturers of pivots. And while you're probably not going to require any adjustment initially, over time, where concrete slabs can move, doors can sag, frames can sag, especially an aluminum storefront where it's all mechanically fastened together, might be nice to scooch that up a little bit. I find that gravity does take a toll on everything in life, including hardware. And there's that positive locking is a reference to a set screw that's there. Intermediate pivots are technically required on doors 60-inch and over. 60-inch and over, for every 30-inch, you'll add 1 pivot. So a door that's 84-inch would require 1 pivot. A door that's 92-inch would require 2 pivots, up to 10 foot, and then another pivot, another intermediate pivot, I should say. Now, let's look at the images that we have down below. There's the box. There's all of our paperwork. Everything in the box, I should say. And you'll get, well, I'll show you that in a moment. There's your bottom and your top all put together. Your bottom, floor portion only. The underside of the door portion. Let's look at the last 3 images that we have here. Your top pivot. Those can be purchased separately if you needed to. Showing what that looks like. And then your fastener package. You'll get everything you need for wood or metal applications. And then an Allen wrench where you're going to need those. Because you will in a couple of spots. This pivot, this top pivot's going to have the opportunity for you to unthread that cap. And then, of course, your bottom pivot does have that set screw right there. Loosen that, thread that up and down, tighten it down again, give you a little bit of adjustment should you need that down the road. Okay, template. Let's look at that first. Okay, this is a technical drawing. I think I oversold its simplicity. This is not in the box, by the way. This is something you'd probably give to your door manufacturer. This does lay out everything that you need to know about where it's all laid out in terms of the holes in relationship to the hardware itself, so you know where to reinforce, drill, and tap your aluminum or your hollow metal. And then it does get into everything that you need to know in terms of how to mortise this. And yes, it's true, you do have to study it if you're going to study it from this approach. But, where do you place the top pivot? Well, it's really easy. It's 5/16 from the edge. And then it's 3/16 from the face of the door to the face of the plate. From that point, you can lay all this out because you have the rest of the dimensions. You know that you have the width, you know that you have the length. It's all here. It's all right here. So in 12 seconds, I just told you how to prep for the top pivot and the door and the header. Okay. That's what it's going to look like. And that, frankly, is the reason why you need all of the dimensions, because if you're going to do everything from scratch, you do have to know absolutely where everything is. Now the bottom pivot has The same type of information on it, giving you dimensions of where everything's laid out. My goodness. So, edge of door to where that pivot start is 1/4 inch. It's clearly a 1/4 inch. See note 3. What does note 3 tell us? Heel edge of door must be beveled 1/8 inch in 2 inch as shown. So that's a mistake. Well, okay, so they're showing this with a small radius on it, but they're not. Yeah, I would say a radius on this is going to be, 5/16 of an inch if you were going to radius that door, which is not unusual. If you were going to use a square edge door, you would need to radius the door as it's shown here. If you're going to have a beveled door, you don't have to bullnose it like this. It'd be better to call that a bullnose. The top row of tile in the bathroom looks like that. Now, 1/8 and 2, if you're not familiar with that terminology, let's discuss what that means. We have 4 door edges here: square, radiused, rabbited, beveled. 1/8 and 2 means from this point to this point. That's 1/8 of an inch for every 2 inches in door thickness. So your door is 1 3/4 inches. It turns out to, by the way, to be a 3-degree bevel. So for an 1 3/4 inch thick door, the high side of the door and the low side of the door are going to be different by 1/4 inch, but just a little less than 1/4 inch, whatever that turns out to be. AutoCAD is helpful for determining that. That's what that means. Now, the modern definition of bevel is handy because it's saying, I don't care about your door thickness. You want a 10-inch thick door? Great. For every 2 inch in thickness, I want 1/8 of an inch bevel on that difference. So there you go. That's what 1/8 and 2 means. Installer must verify that the center of the top pivot, yeah, it has to be plumb, obviously. Heel edge of door, which is the pivot style, that needs to be beveled. You've got bolts, you've got some vertical adjustment, and reinforcing is required, and that's the template, really. And as you study this, it's going to give you the dimensions of everything and everywhere. This is for the door manufacturer. However, you can use this to prep your door and frame for. You need nothing else. It's all here. The next document is installation for bottom pivot. And here's the bottom pivot installation instructions. This is what's in the box. And, they don't give you any information in this document that would be required for you to mortise the door for the hardware. So be mindful. You'll need that template if you're going to mortise things. But, it shows, it does talk to you about how to go about installing the hardware. Without reading this all to you, the installation of the hardware is such that you are going to attach the frame portion, or the jamb portion has to be attached. The door portion has to be attached. We then have our top pivot. Both of these components need to be attached. The cap with the Allen wrench and the pivot pin needs to come out. You'll then set the door on the bearing spindle and then tip it into place. And once you have it in place and lined up, you'll then push your pivot pin up into there and secure it with your pivot cap. That's how it's done. It's that simple. It's a 2-person job. You know, it's no fun doing it alone. It may be impossible to do it alone. You know, if you're like me, you might need a helper. But that's where these installation instructions gives you everything that you need. Interesting. The installation instructions tell you they want it beveled and with a 3/16 radius. Yeah, I had said 5/16 earlier. I was just gauging that off of the template. But now most people, I never see this. Very rarely see this treatment, if ever. I know I've spoken to woodworkers who I've spoken to about that, and they've done it. And you want to do it, because I find over time, I was called to a job site because the client had a Rixson 27 floor closer. And I have to mention Rixson because IVES doesn't make floor closers. And it was creaking. Well, the original installation years ago, walnut veneer door exterior or mahogany veneer door exterior application in Southwest Florida. They didn't radius that. Well, that outside corner was making ever so slight contact with the rabbet of the jamb. And that's because over the decade, things got loose. Those screws probably loosened up, and now the door is shifting a little bit, hitting the jamb. And it made me realize that small, tiny detail is required. So, yeah, you know, if you've got aluminum storefront, they'll have a soft radiused edge like that as well. I can't tell you it's 3/16, but it generally is. Now, that top pivot is detailed here. Same approach, some dimensions. Talk to you about that radius. I would certainly suggest that you read this, but, you know, without going through it in a grotesque, painstaking fashion. What I had said earlier is really the approach to get it all installed, is the bottom line. Okay, so we have that pretty much explained out, so let's just continue moving on with what we have going on here. There is a product brochure left for us to review. This is an IVES catalog, a little bit older catalog, that's for sure. I will show you in a moment where a more current IVES catalog is. So the 7212 can be seen in this product catalog that's here, and all of the pivots that are in the pivot section. So you might want to review all of this. If you're not sure if it's the right pivot, take a look. I don't sell that 7212V very often. Why would you need this? Well, you know, you've got a radiused header. Could be a valid reason. Or I'll tell you this. A lot of people want pivots, and they do nothing but drywall returns on everything. It's just metal studs and drywall for the header. And I said, well, what are you going to mortise to? He's like, oh, I don't know. It's going to work. I'll cut the drywall, and I'll put some screws, and it's going to work. And I'm hearing these words. You know, installing a door to the top pivot to a 16-gauge metal stud is just... It startles me. It shocks me every time. So, you know, there is a hardware answer for a lot of those applications, and there it is. You know, variations on these pivots as well. I'm scrolling through because I had mentioned center hung and IVES and wanted to get to that area where we can take a look at center hung. So here is their 7253. That's a 300-pound center hung. The 55 is a 500-pound center hung. 7255 is a 500-pound. They have a 600-pound version, and like I said, when you go with the heavier than 500-pound, you get a bigger door arm. So that, while it's only an additional 100 pounds, you get a lot more arm to attach to, especially if you're doing a bookcase application. I would think you'd want to take a look at, you know, all the options. Then you've got a 1,000-pound monster here. This is going to be for extremely heavy doors, exterior gate applications, something that's obscenely heavy. This is what's called an end load, because you attach the arm to the spindle from the end of the door versus a model that could be a side load, which would have that preparation in the face of it. And very interestingly enough, you'll see a reference to a concave jamb. There it is. It's one way to use that hardware or to install it. Intermediate pivots are down in here. Different sizes, different applications, through wire. These are called pocket hinges or pivots, or Harmon hinges they're called. Very neat hinges. If you were to search Harmon hinge, you will find some really cool applications. You will see these in hospitals very often. You'll see them in hotels. And they're used when you need to remove the door when the door is open at 90 degrees. Remove the door from encroaching into the clear opening, just like a swing clear hinge does. A Harmon hinge does that as well, and that's what it's used for. Really unusual door prep that's required for this, so be mindful of what you're doing. Now, there is a link below this video as seen here to the manufacturer's page. And when we click on that, we can pull up not only all of the IVES products we sell by means of this horizontal navigation as seen here, but also a link to the manufacturer's current or most current product catalog, as well as prior versions of the catalog, some encyclopedic documents, templates, mounting types, pivot catalog, parts manual. But for fun, a couple of really old IVES catalogs are here as well. We've got one from 1904 and one from 1896. Let's go for the older one. IVES was known even when I started my career. If someone came in asking for IVES, it was either for baseboard mounted solid brass stops. It may have been for other hardware odds and ends like a shutter bar, but most often it was window hardware, sash lifts and sash locks. And that's indeed what you'll find in these really old IVES catalogs. Window hardware, variations of them. Okay, I'll leave it to you to explore those should you like. Let's wrap up this video on camera. If you've made it this far into this video, you must be determined to see it through to the end, and we appreciate your hanging in there with us and watching this entire video. It means a lot. It takes a lot of work to create these videos in the sense that, it's time taken away from doing other things. However, the advantage for me personally of creating these videos is the fact that it does allow myself to either learn about something new, to reacquaint myself with something, or to reinforce what I believe that I already know. Any comments that you might leave down below would be greatly appreciated. Thank you. Now, in conclusion, if you have any questions on this IVES 7212 pivot set, please feel free to reach out to us. It is a typical and common piece of equipment that you're going to find on all kinds of doors. Now, why would people want pivots is really where the question starts to lead to. And in my experience, people want pivots because many different reasons. First of all, pivots will absolutely and always thoroughly outshine hinges, butt hinges, not hinges in general, but butt hinges when it comes to load capacity. How many 5x5, hinges do you know can handle this weight range? Well, this is a bad example, but what about the 7255 that we looked at earlier, the 500, the 600, the 1,000-pound variations of this? How many times will you see butts that will do that? Well, in fact, they exist. But they are anything but garden variety means of hanging a door, and pivots will always outshine butt hinges when it comes to weight capacity. There's exceptions, certainly. Sauce concealed hinges, those suckers can handle hundreds of pounds. Their Hercules versions can get over 1,000 pounds. Stanley has hinges, butt hinges they have hinges in their detention hardware that will get you out to 2,000 pounds, but they are anything but common. So pivots are great when you have something that's heavier. Okay, they're also great when it comes to what the door will look like in 10 years. You can hang a 200-pound door on some 5 by 4.5 inch heavyweight hinges, but I assure you the wear and tear on that top hinge is going to be quite evident, whereas on a pivot that's rated for the same weight, less so. And generally when you have a problem with a pivot, it's the surrounding structure that starts to fail, like the concrete cracks on the outside. That causes the door to stop fitting very well. And yes, thrust bearings and spindles wear out with time, as does everything. But there are certain door types that are just exclusively the purview of pivot hardware. Lead line doors, very typical for a pivot application. The other application for pivots is because some people will deem that aesthetically they're more elegant. Okay, I can certainly understand what you're saying there. When it comes to center hung pivots, people will specifically select those because of that concealed fashion or type of feature of concealed pivots. You don't see hardly anything. You might have evidence that the door has been prepped for it, like that bullnose or even a radius, but you don't see much of the hardware, that's to be sure. So pivots are a great choice for a lot of options, and they may be your only choice in certain options as well. Any questions on the 7212 or any other IVES pivot, please feel free to reach out to us. And thank you very much. Again, thank you for watching, and if you've enjoyed this video, please click thumbs up, please subscribe, and maybe even send the video to someone that you know. Thank you.